Hey, Raymond here from the Beginner Photography Podcast, and there is nobody in the world worse at video games than me. So let's get into today's interview.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to interviewing world-class photographers to ask them the questions you want answered. Whether you want to be the world's best wedding photographer, family photographer, pet photographer, or you just want to take better photos of your kids growing up, we will get you to start taking better photos today. Here with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodgers fan, and award-winning Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me. I am Raymond Hatfield, your host of the Beginner Photography Podcast, and today we have another wonderful interview that I'm super excited to get into and talk about. It's something a little bit different, but I think that you guys are going to enjoy it. But first, I wanted to take care of a few things first. So the first thing is we have a new review on iTunes, and it's something that I really want to share. It is from another listener, just like you, from user NoStar234. They gave us a 5-star review for the podcast. First of all, thank you so much for a 5-star review. That is incredible and really makes me feel as if I'm kind of on the right path. Sometimes I look through this podcast through the lens of somebody who knows photography, and it's hard to judge sometimes, but I'm glad that it's resonating. So NoStar234 said, best photography podcast out there. This has been the most educational and inspirational podcast for photography that I have found. This podcast has helped me get out of my rut and move for my photography. The guests have been amazingly helpful, and the host Raymond is so down to earth and easy to relate to. I don't want to say anything more. I don't want to build on that at all, because that is just, it's short, it is sweet, it is right to the point, and it's exactly what I want to encompass within this podcast. It's educational and inspirational. You know, we don't talk a lot about gear or settings on this podcast, but more of the stories behind the photographers that help move you in a direction that you want to go towards. Okay, next thing. I want to talk about an email that I got this week. And normally I don't really talk about emails. Emails are kind of a private thing. It's like one-on-one interactions. But I didn't publicize this to begin with, so I kind of feel like it deserves a little bit of an explanation. A few months ago, I had started a Patreon for listeners of the Beginner Photography Podcast. And in the beginning, we got a success. There were a handful of people who became patrons of the podcast, and I had made promises that I was going to deliver for my patrons of the podcast. They were going to get early access to find out who upcoming guests were, so that they could ask questions that would relate to them. And then that was the one that I was most excited for. But I found that on top of that, there really wasn't much value. I really wasn't providing as much value as I had as I had hoped. I really wanted Patreon to be something that you, the listeners, would be excited for, because you'd be getting more from me. And I just didn't live up to that promise. And I felt really bad. I felt really, really bad. So one day I woke up and I literally had a bad dream about it. And I'm not one of the people who I had a bad dream, I'm just going to change my life. But I had a bad dream, and it's just that I knew that it was real. You know what I mean? I knew that feeling that I had inside of me was yeah, I need to take care of this. I don't just want to go on having a Patreon for people and not delivering enough, right? I try to put myself in your shoes. What would make me want to become and stay a patron of the podcast? And my answer was I just wasn't delivering it. So I went to Patreon and I shut it down. I stopped it. And then I reached out to everybody individually and told them, said, hey, here's what's up. I feel like I was not delivering enough value to you for being a patron of the podcast, and therefore I'm closing down Patreon. It might come up someday in the future, but right now it's not. So because of that, I thank you for your support of the podcast, but I'm closing this thing down, I guess. And I didn't publicize it, right? I talked about starting the Patreon a lot in the podcast, but I didn't really talk about closing it down. And I think it's because I kind of felt like it was a bit of a failure. I felt like I had made these promises and they just weren't lived up to, and because of that, I didn't really want to say, hey, everybody, I'm closing down the Patreon, because I had went to everybody individually and I had let them know the status of Patreon and why I closed it down. So I really didn't talk about it a lot here on the podcast, but I did get an email this week from somebody saying that they went back, and this is the beauty of the internet, I guess. They went back and were listening to an older episode where I talked about becoming a patron of the podcast. They got excited. They wanted to become a patron, and they went to my Patreon, and there was no there was no information. So I want to talk about that just in case in the future somebody else is listening and thinking about that as well. What I'm still trying to figure out is how I can do my best for you, how I can deliver as much of myself to you as possible. But I am enjoying the ride that I'm on right now, and I'm just going to keep it up. So that's it. I just kind of wanted to keep everybody abreast of what is going on and just kind of avoid any confusion. So there you have it. There you have it. Last thing, it is February still. Again, if you're listening in the future, just kind of tune out the next minute or so. But since it's still February 2018, there's still time to post your photos in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group under the brand new monthly theme of passion. There have been some great photos in there from some of our, from fellow listeners, just like yourself, and other members of the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group who are getting I really wish that everybody could see the reaction that the group had to last month's photo critique. It actually took over an hour and a half. I really did not expect it to go on that long, but there were so many great photos, and I just wanted to go in depth about why a photo was so good, or what made it great, or what small changes could really elevate the photo into the next level. And like I said, it took over an hour and a half, and the response from that has just been great. So if you want to join, share your photos, and get a critique on your most recent work, this month, like I said, February is all about passion, then I would love to have you come join. Just head over to facebook.com/Beginner Photography Podcast, and then there is a link, I believe, on the right side of the page for to join the group. So just go ahead and click it and join. All right. That's all the business that we got to take care of today. We're going to get into today's interview. And like I said earlier, it's one that I'm really excited about because it's not with a photographer. And I know this sounds weird, but I'm going to try to do a few more of these throughout the year. Maybe not every week, but I want to kind of reach out to more creatives, people more than just photographers, because I think that their outlook on the creative fields parallels photography, and because of that, I think that they have a lot of great information that they can share. And I think today's interview with Kerstin Pressler is a great example of that. So we're going to get right on into it right now. Enjoy. Today's guest is Kerstin Pressler, a fine arts artist and business coach for creatives from Germany. Today, she's here to chat with us about the myth of the starving artist. So thank you for coming on the podcast. But first, I want to ask you, how do I make a ton of money right away?
Thank you so much for having me. So I think making a ton of money right away is also a big myth. That won't work out too.
Okay, I get it. So that was a bad first question to start off with. So
I know it's not a bad question, but it's just the balance. I think thinking about going into a creative business and thinking you will struggle is a bad kind of stepping stone to get to anything.
Right.
But going into it and expecting everything to just come to you because you want it is also pretty naive, I guess.
Sure. So I guess the reason why I asked that question is because I feel like a lot of people starting off in photography who do decide to take their photography into a business endeavor, they think that photographers make a lot of money. So I'm glad that you said that, because that naive mindset is absolutely correct, and that I can completely attest to. So first, before we really get into the interview, I mentioned there, you're not a photographer. You are a fine arts artist. And I'm really excited to talk to you today because obviously you're an artist with a very strong message that totally applies to photographers. So can you tell us, to start off with, what it is that you do.
Okay, so first of all, I'm a formally trained painter, which means I went to art school, like to college. I have a degree in fine arts, Bachelor of Fine Arts, which sounds awesome. And you can't buy anything for that. But
Right.
if you then educate yourself, you can actually get into selling your paintings and creating even more. I feel like being a fine artist is such a broad education that you can do anything with it. You can do nothing with it, but you can do anything if you want to. So that's the good thing. And then I went on, got my master's in art and cultural management and marketing, which has been a blast because it's, on one hand, it's just fun. And on the other hand, it actually helps to grow a business, which then led me into actually helping other people to grow their creative businesses. Because with that knowledge and just my passion overall, things got rolling. It took a while, especially because I, right out of college, got my son, which maybe some of you people listening will relate to. Running a creative business and doing your stuff when having a kid at home. He's napping right now, so that's a good thing. That's not easy. And it's a lot of management and a lot of, sometimes things just don't work out
Of
like you
course.
thought to. So, yeah. So I got into that and things grow and evolve and it's just fun. And now I'm really into getting other creators believe into overcoming the starving artist myth, because I found it's just not true. Yes, of course, if you don't do anything, you won't make any money, you will struggle and it will not really be fun. But if you go out there and talk about your creative work, is it photography or it's painting, it doesn't matter. It's like the same with every creative passion. It's not really a needed product. It's not like water or food. Like
It's a
it's
luxury.
luxury.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you will find the right people that want that luxurious thing in their life if you go out there, show yourself, talk about it, and yeah, show your work. But they
Okay.
won't come knocking onto your studio door and ask you to show them your work. That
Right.
won't happen.
I figured that out quickly after I made my first website. I thought, oh, if I just have a website, everybody's gonna come to it, all these brides, and I don't have to do anything. This is gonna be great. It's just gonna be like this reoccurring door of brides, and yeah, no, it doesn't work like that. You're absolutely correct. So
Yeah, I think that's the first struggle everybody has that creates a website. It's just like, oh, now and then the website is out there and nobody calls.
yeah, it's like getting into photography was this easy. Learning my settings was this easy. So how hard could it be to, find a client, I guess, who would want my work? But yeah, it does not work like that. So obviously you work with other creatives.
Yes.
I want to know where you start with them. What do they tend to need help with the most?
Okay, most of them. I would say really most of them. They're like you just described it. They went out, learned their passion. They really got into photography, learned everything they need, every technical thing they had to figure out. They learned lighting. They learned how to work with nature because that can be a struggle. All
Yes.
those things. They learned it. And then they thought, okay, now let's sell this stuff. And then the big bummer comes when the money is not flowing in, the clients are not finding them at all. And most of the time we start right there. We take inventory of what they actually know and can do. Like some have a website, some don't. Yeah, inventory, taking inventory of what you've got. And from there, we take a look at what you need. And most of the time it's marketing, being visible, just going to, you do wedding photography,
Yes.
going to trade shows or wedding events where people come that actually want to have their wedding photos
Right.
taken, and just being there, showing your stuff, talking to people and building a connection. Most of the time it's not really about selling, because if you have beautiful pictures, they talk for themselves and everybody can imagine themselves being the beautiful bride and the groom and having the beautiful lighting and those kind of things. You can imagine that,
Yes.
but they won't get to your door if you won't be at a event venue where they show wedding stuff.
Of course. So do you think that's because maybe they're scared to put themselves out in that situation, to be in these places?
Yeah, I think so. I think we as creatives are so critical about our own work that we hold ourselves back
Right.
and not show it.
I can attest to
Because
that,
we
sure.
think it needs to be perfect. but it will grow. Like eventually, gradually, you will grow. You can raise your prices. You will be able to get more high-end people into your business. But you need to start where you are. And at a certain point, when you know your craft, it's time to start selling it and going out there. Yeah. But that's the hard part. Yeah.
Yeah.
Failing is a big thing, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes sense. It's a big decision, you know, when it comes to photography, especially wedding photography. When it comes to like portrait photography, I think that there's just a lot of options. So, kind of, I guess this just kind of popped into my head. When it comes to like fine arts, I'm not sure how that world works, right? But I'm assuming that if somebody is looking for, does somebody come looking for a piece, or is somebody looking for your reputation? I'm just trying to figure out how I can incorporate this into photography.
It depends. Mm-hmm. It depends. Probably like if you're not yet in a museum and you don't have a gallery, mm-hmm. which you can choose against even if you have a big name and stuff. But when you're not at that level, people probably won't come to you because of your name. Right.
So like you mentioned earlier, it is a luxury. When it comes to photography, I guess it's a little easier because people see photos on Facebook all the time. And if they see a nice photo, they're going to think to themselves, wow, I would like a nice photo. Whereas when it comes to art has this, like paintings in particular, have a really high perceived value because a lot of work does go into it, obviously, lots of hours. Whereas photography, it's much less because everybody has a camera on their phone. Anybody can take a photo, essentially. So, I had a point to that segue. There was a segue.
I know where you're going. It's the same. It's basically the same. You have to educate your clients that you can give them more than what they can do. I sometimes hear, "Oh, I could do that," and then I think, "Yeah, but I went to art school for 10 years."
Right.
I don't think you can do that.
Right.
Even though you think you can do that, and that's the same with photography. Like, yes, people can snap a photo, but having the quality of a professional is something completely different. And you just, as a photographer, but also as a painter, you need to educate your clients as to what you bring to the table. Right. Because as a photographer, you can explain that I had photos taken and I was really annoyed by it because I had a pony at the time and the photographer didn't see that my pony was like split. Which looked a bit stupid. And at the same time, I've been pregnant. So you get a bit bigger boobs. Like, I don't know how many male people you have here in the audience, but I had my arms in front of my top. So it pulled a bit down and it looked like big boobs. And like it was meant to be photos I could put on my website as a professional, not to have pregnancy, maternity shoot. So it wasn't, and I was really disappointed. And as a photographer, you can educate your clients that you have the eye for those kind of things. You see how they need to stand against the light, that it's actually flattering and beautiful, that the sun is behind a couple that is kissing or whatever.
Yes.
You can tell them how you bring those kind of things to the table. You can make them feel really special because most of the time, wedding photography, you're with them on their wedding day.
I would hope with wedding photography, you're always with them on their wedding day. But yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Education is a very important part to when it comes to photography. And that kind of brings me to my next point is that on your website, it says that when you started your business, you made a lot of mistakes and you learned a ton. So first question is, what sorts of mistakes were you making? And second of all, how and when did you realize that those were actually mistakes? Because surely you didn't make the decision knowing that it was going to be a mistake.
No, absolutely not. So one of the bigger mistakes was to start hopping into having a brick and mortar before I actually had honed in on what I want to offer.
Ah, okay.
So I spent a ton of money just on a studio space where I planned on getting people in to do workshops with. I was planning on doing, showing my artworks. That didn't work out because I didn't have the artworks ready yet. I didn't have a concept for it. I just went for it because I thought, okay, when I have the space, the other things will follow. And it was just a waste of money. Mm-hmm. At a certain point, I did all those things in that space, but I could have spared myself paying rent for at least 6 months or something. So that was a mistake. wasn't a good one. And I think as a photographer, that is probably something you can relate.
I've heard it. I've heard it from plenty of other photographers, just like that.
Yeah.
I didn't run into that because at the time when I first started, I really didn't want a studio space. I liked the idea of being able to work from home, live a life kind of, I guess, on my terms, be able to do whatever I wanted in my time rather than feeling weighed down by a studio space. But like portrait photographers, I know portrait photographers really get excited about having a studio space, and the people who are typically asking that are asking because they're not ready for a studio space. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They think that that's just the next progression. I know my settings, but I'm not getting clients. I bet if I just had a location, people would just automatically come in. That's it. I got to get a studio. And as you just said right there, it doesn't really work like that. And you could save a lot of money by putting in work, I'm guessing, behind the scenes to, I don't know, grow your clientele or your skill set specifically. So, I kind of want to talk now about the abundant lifestyle, because you mentioned that on your website. Can you first define to me what is an abundant lifestyle?
Okay, I talk about being a sparkling creative, and you can say sparkling could be bling and you can buy all the fancy things, but that's not really what I mean. Yes, of course, I'm a girl. I like to have sparkling things in my life. But what I really mean is that you can choose to work or not to work, or you can choose to work with a specific client or not because that one isn't fitting you. Or you can, like I am right now, I have cut back my hours enormous. Like it's put in half. I just work in the morning when my son is in kindergarten, and then I work at night every now and then. Not every night because I like my husband pretty much and want to spend time with him too. So, those kind of things that really make your life, make you feel abundant, that you can pay your bills without getting panic attacks, or you avoiding your bank accounts because you know there's nothing on there. And those kind of things to overcome that, and then have a certain convenience in your life, like having your own place, maybe a car, whatever you need. When you live here, you don't really need a car, but
I can't even imagine that. As somebody who lives in America, like where I live, I can't imagine not having a car. Our public transportation system is terrible, you know, and it's typically like city to city. So if you want to go somewhere far, you have to have a car. So, but I get what you're saying about the abundant lifestyle, is that it's more of a mindset, and there's no roadmap to get there because each person's destination is going to be different. Is that right?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. It's so different. Like if you're just coming out of school, like college, whatever, you probably don't need as much as we are as a family.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I was just thinking about that. In 2 days, it will be my 30th birthday, and I was trying to think back to when I was turning 20 and how excited I was, but at the same time, how little responsibility I had, and how my values at 20 are drastically different at 30, and yet still inside I feel like the same person. And it's very weird. It's very conflicting. But having that self-realization to know what it is that I'm looking for now is important. I don't know if that it doesn't matter. Anyway, there are listeners who have a job, but photography is their creative outlet. And obviously the idea of making money is like, oh, this is pretty exciting. But if they're being true to themselves, they have no intentions of leaving their job. So what's something that you would say to them? What should they have in place?
Now, I never recommend to just quit your job and go and, I don't know, jump into it. It can be the right fit for you if you maybe are a stay-at-home mom right now and your husband can take care of everything for a while. Then it can be the right fit, or you're having a partner that can take care of you. But if you don't have that, don't just jump into it. That would be really stupid.
Of course. But I guess so. Like these people, they don't want to leave their job. But in terms of like having that abundant lifestyle, right? They're not going to be dependent on this money that they'll be making from photography. What should they be thinking about in their lives to advance in that direction?
Okay, so first of all, I would say if you don't need the money right now and you still feel like you need to develop your craft, then go for it. Go learn with people that are inspiring you, and you can take their workshops, and you can just focus on your craft. And if you don't have the need right now to make any money with that, that's totally fine. Just develop your passion. And maybe if you think, okay, in maybe 5 years, I would like to dabble my feet a bit more into having a client here and there, then also start your business education. Because it's not just that that's the situation we all always have, you know your craft, and then what? So get to know a bit more about what it means to be a photographer that actually makes money.
Right. Okay.
Bookkeeping skills, really helpful. Not so sexy, but really helpful.
Definitely not. Here, I'm not sure how taxes work in Germany, but it's tax time here in America. And recently I've been going through all of my bookkeeping, and it's kind of fun because I feel sometimes like what am I doing? I'm not making any progress getting somewhere. But when I look year after year of the bigger picture, how much came in, how much came out, how much I took home, it's like, oh, okay, I can see that this is growing, and it's really exciting. So you're right, bookkeeping can be boring for 12/12ths of the year, but the one day where you have to like put in all that work and look at all your past experience, it can be kind of rewarding. Now that we're kind of on the topic of money, I want to talk about the idea of the starving artist. It lives too strong in the heart of every new photographer, painter, calligrapher, ceramicist or ceramics artist. I'm not sure what the correct term is. Why do you think that is, and what's something that they can do to change that mindset?
All right, I think the origin of this myth is because society as a whole isn't used to you just doing the creative stuff you want to do. We've been all trained for decades, centuries, to just be the worker bee, to do your job, not think, just do. And there have been certain resentments against the free bird. And that frustration, I think, comes out in things like, oh, can you actually make a living from photography or fine art or whatever it is? I think we all heard it, like every creative. And I think that's partly jealousy and partly lack of imagination that society just has. And it's the funny thing, it's not just an American thing, it's not just a European thing, it's a worldwide thing. But at the same time, if you look back into the past, if you look at Rembrandt, he created a lot of works as commission pieces. So he actually got paid. He wasn't a starving artist. So it is a myth. Like in history, every decade has and century has their great creatives and painters and musicians, and they all got paid because otherwise they wouldn't have made a living. Right. Or they were like in a relationship where they got sponsored by a big admirer, which is basically being paid for being creative. So it doesn't need to be, don't need to be starving. And if you look around right now, you have big photographers. I guess people in your audience might know Jenna Kutcher. She's really promoting her wedding photography and stuff. She's not struggling or starving or anything.
No, she's not.
She's thriving. Yeah. So in every industry and in every creative niche, you have those striving people, and those we need to look out for, not for the people that are actually happy struggling, because I think that's a mindset switch. You can thrive. And if the first moment you leave those past fears and struggles behind, you open up to actually find a way to create that striving plan of your creative business.
So what are those fears and struggles that people hold on to? Is it failure?
I think it's partly failure, lack of money, like, not knowing where the bills get paid from. I think that's a big thing. Sure. And people talking negatively about their creative work, because we're all those little unicorns that are afraid of people saying it's not good enough.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah.
Yeah, and just people saying you're not good enough. If you reach out and present your work, you're afraid of people rejecting you as a person. Mm-hmm. So those kind of fears, yeah.
So if where do you suggest the listeners start? What's the first thing that creatives should start working on?
Okay, I would say going out there. Like that was a big mistake when we've been talking about mistakes, that I've been afraid to go out there and present my artworks and to be there and visible, even if things are not perfect. Maybe your first, I don't know how they called, wedding event where people show.
Yeah, like a bridal show.
Yeah. Okay, your first bridal show won't be, you won't have the perfect stationery, you won't have the perfect business cards. It doesn't matter. Just being there, and maybe there is one couple that you really can connect with, and then that's already a big win.
Yeah.
So just go out there, or if you do portrait photography and you don't have clients yet, maybe offer up a flyer in your region and just talk to parents that would like to have their kids photographed, or whatever it is that your niche is. Or go out, and if you want to do maternity shoots, whatever it is, go to places where pregnant people are. And if you're not doing a really, really bad job, and you connect with people and talk to them and just be open, you will have the possibility to offer up your services. And maybe in the beginning it is a pretty low rate, but then you can make them feel special, you can take their photos, you can improve your work, and they will talk about it. Because if you really have beautiful photos, if it is a portrait, wedding, it doesn't matter. If you have beautiful photos, you show them.
That's
you talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's it.
So really, like, what I keep hearing from you kind of over and over, there's this underlying theme of like really putting yourself out there and becoming known. Because if you're in the face of other people, it's easier to sell yourself, right? Is that?
Yeah. And you don't really have to sell then. It's, right. I at least for me, it's like really selling. I can't really sell. I can make connections with people. And then people are either convinced my work is good and they buy, or they're not. And that's fine.
Okay. So let's run through a little quick exercise. What if somebody, what if you were to put yourself out there and you see you're trying to shoot maternity photos, and you get out there and you find somebody who is a very good fit for your type of photography. Their personality is, very nice. And if you're trying to build your portfolio, what would you say to, because I know that it's different for painting than it is for photography, but what would you say about potentially shooting that session for free? Would you ever suggest that? And do you think that would diminish the appeared value of your name and your work?
I think if you're really just starting out and you're just getting your feet wet with actual clients, you can shoot for free. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't expect you to shoot like 20 people for free.
Of course, yeah.
But if you get the first 5 in for free and you have them talk about your work and you really give them, and you really need to treat them as if they would pay to really give them the perfect experience, then start charging. Start charging low, start charging high, whatever feels comfortable to you. But no, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, no, that's kind of exactly what I wanted to hear. Because it can be tough to get started, right? A lot of times, and I was telling this to somebody the other day, a lot of people's first wedding that they shoot is like a friend's or something like that. But when I first really started to get into wedding photography, I had just moved out across the country and I knew nobody here. And it was very hard for me to get people who were willing to spend, $1,000+ on something that I hadn't even proven, which was partially my fault. But it wasn't until I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to shoot for much cheaper just to try to get that first person in the door. It really did work. It really did work because that gave me something to show, let me build my confidence, and kind of showed me the flow, I guess, of a wedding and how it all works. So that's great. That's great advice. Is there some piece of information that you hear a lot that's meant to help beginners, but turns out it's just that you think personally is just kind of poor advice?
Yeah. One thing for sure is with online marketing and especially social media marketing, to be everywhere. Like, you can't freaking be everywhere. Just focus on one place. Be there. Be consistent, like really consistent. And then things will start growing. And when you have one thing under your belt, you can tackle the next thing. You don't need to be on every bridal show. You don't need to be on every, event. You don't need to be everywhere. Just where you be at your best and be consistent, turning up and being there.
Man,
so
that's a great
one
tip.
thing.
That is a really, really great tip. I know that's going to really resonate with the listeners, because they feel oftentimes like, well, I got to have a Facebook page. I got to have an Instagram. I got to be on Snapchat or whatever. I got to be doing Instagram stories. But as somebody who also tries to be in those places, I know how overwhelming that can be. So that's a wonderful tip. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, and be money conscious. Like, really, you don't spend money you don't have. Like, of course, get your equipment. You need that to do anything, but really be conscious about where you spend your money. You don't need all those fancy tools people are promoting. Most of the time, you can just wing it with a bit of Trello and a bit of Dropbox, and then you can add on as you go.
Yeah, that's also very smart. Don't spend money that you don't have. Yeah, I think a lot of people think that's obvious advice, but they don't follow it. So that's wonderful.
And it is something you need to keep in mind at every single level.
Every single level. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So, Kirsten, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today. And I really want to be mindful of your time, because you have shared a ton of great information that, even as somebody who isn't a photographer, I know you shared information that's really going to resonate with people who are photographers, because we're both on that same wavelength of we're just creating something that's making us happy. So, again, thank you so much for coming on. Can you share with the listeners where they can find out more about you online and potentially working with you?
Yes, I'm guessing you're listening to a podcast, so you enjoy podcasts. So you can hop on over to the Sparkling Creative Podcast. You can find us on iTunes and everywhere, like where you're supposed to listen to and podcasts. Or you go to KerstinPressler.com. And I know my name is really hard to write, so I probably guess you put it in show notes.
It's absolutely going to be in the show notes. Yep.
So yeah, there you can find me.
Perfect. Again, well, Kirsten, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm excited to see what the future holds for you.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a blast.
Oh man, that was a fun interview with Kirsten. She is really knowledgeable when it comes. Like, what's great is that obviously she is trained. Like, she's formally trained in painting. She is a beautiful painter, and if you look at her website, you'll understand. What's great though is that she has found something that she loves to do and is able to make money at it, right? Obviously, this whole interview was about the myth of the starving artist, and she's absolutely right. You know, a lot of it is just the mindset, and you got to figure out how to get over that mindset. And I really enjoyed my interview with Kirsten. So Kirsten, if you're listening right now, thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything that you did. I know that it might have been a little hard. A lot of people don't really like to talk about finances and making money, which I think is kind of strange, but you blew through all of that and you were super helpful. So if you're listening and you have any follow-up questions, I really butchered that one. If you have any follow-up questions with Kirsten, I have added her to the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group. And I'm sure that she would be more than happy to answer anything that you can throw her way. So that is it. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that this next week I hope that there's now a fire under your butt and you're going to get out there. You're going to start shooting. I really want you all to have fun, enjoy yourself, and ultimately be safe out there. All right, guys. I will see you all next week. Love ya.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. Be sure to join the conversations on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want any links or resources we talked about in today's episode, check out the show notes at beginnerphotographypodcast.com. See you again next week.